For your first task, I want you to go to whiteboard.fi. What you can remember from Year 7, see if you can explain what an input device is, an output device, hardware and software. Try to use as few words as possible. Hopefully you've come up with some of these answers. An input device is a device which sends data to the CPU from the user. That might be through a mouse or a keyboard. An output device is information coming out of the computer, sent from the CPU, for example, a monitor or speakers. Hardware are the physical parts of the computers, remember the parts we can touch, such as the monitor and the keyboard. And software are the programs that control the use of the hardware. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at the CPU and the motherboard. Now, so far we've been thinking about the hardware and software and how they work independently. But we've not really thought about how they connect and how they can talk to each other and work together. There'd be no point in having just a computer with just hardware. It wouldn't work. And it would be the same with software. The software needs to run on the computer hardware, otherwise they're not going to talk to each other. Here's an abstracted view of our computer. We send instructions to the CPU from the mouse. The CPU sends requests from programs to our hard drive. Our hard drive then loads our programs into what we call our RAM, our random access memory, and the CPU then works with the program to ensure it's working properly. You've probably just heard a lot of words that you might not be familiar with. Now, in particular, this lesson, we're going to look at that term CPU. Now, when we think about it, what's the brain of the computer? What makes it all work? That is the CPU. Your first task is to open your new workbook. Look for lesson 1 and then move the red circle to try and put it on the location of where you think the CPU might be. Hopefully you've noticed it's here. So here's a standard computer that you'll see in our classrooms. Let's have a look inside of the computer. First of all, you should be able to open the back of the computer by usually some screws, or there could be a flip that will pull it open. And there we go. We can see lots of different items in here. First of all, this big green board, that's what we call our motherboard. This is the board that connects all the different parts of the computer together. This allows them to talk to each other and to work. You can see down here, we've got our hard drive. This is our memory. We've got our power supply at the back, just down here. And then if you look on the front, just there, you can see we've got all our DVD drives, and they are just here. Now, obviously not all computers have DVD drives now, but most of them still will have some kind of drive. Now, right in the middle here, you can see the fan. Now, the fan is used to cool the computer and the motherboard, but we're interested in the CPU. Now, usually, I've got a screwdriver here, it will be attached to the computer through a series of screws, just like this. So if I undo that screw, we should, and I've done the other 3 beforehand, we should be able to lift our fan off. So I need to do that one a little bit more. Let's just do that right the way, just like that. And then that will lift off. There's our fan. Okay, you can see the bottom of it there, and you can see it's connected currently to the motherboard, because remember the motherboard connects things together. Let's just unhook that, and there is our fan. So our fan spins. We've got a heatsink underneath which pushes the air onto this small thing here. This is our CPU. Now remember, the CPU is the brain of our computer. I can unhook it and take it out. Now if you do this at home, you've got to be really careful, because sometimes it has some cooling putty on top, and don't get that on your fingers. And there is our CPU. CPU. You can see where it's connected into, and it just slots directly into it. Now you've seen my video of inside a computer, I want you to go through task 2 and highlight any keywords that you think might explain the motherboard. I would have highlighted motherboard, connects, and allows them to talk. So we've seen this motherboard, this massive board which allows different parts of the computer to talk to each other. Fixed onto that is the central processing unit. Remember, this is our brain of the computer. Some people call it a processor or a microchip. It's installed on the motherboard, and its main jobs are to perform calculations. So like a calculator, but a lot more powerful. But also it works to coordinate our hardware and our software so they can talk to each other. It coordinates the mouse and the keyboard through our computer system. See if you can complete tasks 3, 4 and 5 from the information you've just been shown. Now the CPU works by fetching instructions from hardware. It goes to hardware and fetches what instruction has been pressed. So if you click the mouse or you press a button on the keyboard, it will fetch the instruction that you've asked the computer to do. It will then decode this, and it does this in binary. Remember, these are our zeros and ones, and it does this to perform instructions. Once it's decoded it and figured out what you want it to do, it can then execute it and perform that instruction. Find this page in your workbook and see if you can explain that process of how the CPU fetches, decodes and executes instructions. You've now got a challenge. Please look at these two computers and try and figure out which one is the fastest. You can find the page in your workbook and you only need to write one letter, A or B, to say which is fastest. There's then an extension activity to try and explain why you think that's the case. It's actually the second computer that is fastest. And the way we can spot this is by looking at the processor. How fast a computer runs is measured in a unit called Hertz, Hz. Now remember, giga, GHZ, is gigahertz. The one on the right has 2.9 gigahertz or 3.5 turbo boosted gigahertz. This means it is faster. Well done if you'd spotted this in the last exercise, that hertz is actually the measurement of units for speed of a computer. In fact, hertz is actually measuring the number of these fetch, decode, execute cycles it could run per second. The higher the number, the more it can run. Please open your workbook and on the right hand side explain what processing is measured in. So let's have a quick recap. The CPU is the central processing unit. It's like the brain of the computer. It's responsible for coordinating the hardware and running all the instructions. We look at the fetch, decode, execute cycle as how the CPU works. It fetches an instruction, decodes it, and then executes it. And we can measure the speed of a CPU in hertz. That's the number of FDE cycles that happen per second, and we class this as performance. You're now going to create a website to explain your understanding of the different parts of a computer. You need to log on to this website, www.wix.com, and you'll see a link in your workbook. You'll need to sign in using Continue with Google, and you should have a single sign-in, so you should be able to sign in straight away. You then want to create a new website and select Edit Template. You can choose any template that you would like. And on the first page, all you're going to do is tell me about yourself. You can have a play around, add some images, change the text, and get used to how this website actually works. On the second page, you're going to explain what the CPU is and how it works. So for a good website, I want you to make sure you've got a good background, a large title which says Computer Systems, then a subheading saying CPU and a picture, and then in your own words explain what the CPU is, where it's based. You might want to find an analogy from somewhere from another computer and explain how it works. For the very best websites, I'm going to be looking for more than a single page with navigation and a professional and stylish look. The last task of today's lesson is to write everything you know on our Padlet wall. Go to padlet.com/Mr. Atkinson TSC/CPU1. There's also a link to this in your workbooks. Once you've done this, have a look at other people's definitions and like any definitions you think are good.